The birth of a monster. How Hurricane Melissa redefined power. When the sun rose over the Caribbean that morning, no one could have imagined that history was unfolding in the clouds. The sky above Jamaica was deceptively calm, until the first wall of wind arrived, and everything changed. What had started as a harmless tropical wave off the coast of Africa had now become a roaring, spinning beast of the atmosphere, Hurricane Melissa. By the time the National Hurricane Center confirmed landfall around 9:30 a.m., the readings were almost unbelievable: sustained winds near 185 miles per hour, and a central pressure plunging toward 892 millibars. Those numbers aren't just statistics, they're physics at their most violent. To put it simply, the lower the pressure, the more violently the atmosphere reacts to fill that void. And at 892 MB, Melissa's center was practically a vacuum, a spinning hole of force that pulled air, moisture, and destruction toward it like a black hole of weather. At those wind speeds, air itself becomes a weapon. Roofs lift, steel bends, trees shred into missiles. It's the kind of energy that tears apart concrete, flips trucks, and scours coastlines clean. Meteorologists later said only a handful of storms in Atlantic history had ever matched Melissa's power, names like Wilma, Rita, and Allen, but none had ever hit Jamaica with such ferocity. For an island used to Category 2 or 3 storms, this was uncharted territory. The narrator's tone captures both awe and urgency. We are watching an event that will be studied for decades. Because when a storm like this appears, it doesn't just break records, it rewrites them. To understand why Hurricane Melissa became so powerful, you first have to understand how hurricanes work. They're not random tempests, they're structured engines of heat, spinning systems that feed on the ocean's warmth. Scientists call them warm core cyclones, meaning the center of the storm is literally hotter than its surroundings. The warmer it gets, the faster the air rises, the lower the pressure drops, and the stronger the winds become. Now, here's the crucial detail. In late October 2025, the Caribbean Sea wasn't just warm, it was boiling, figuratively speaking. Sea surface temperatures were hovering around 30 degrees Celsius, nearly 2 degrees above average, and that warmth didn't stop at the surface. Beneath it, the heat stretched hundreds of feet deep, forming what scientists call a deep warm pool. Usually, when hurricanes churn the water, they bring cooler layers to the surface, weakening themselves. But this time, the ocean's heat went too deep for that. Melissa could spin, stir, and rage all it wanted. The ocean kept feeding it. Add one more factor: low vertical wind shear, meaning the winds higher up in the atmosphere weren't tearing the storm apart. That calm upper air environment allowed Melissa's towering clouds to stay vertically aligned, perfectly balanced like a spinning top. The conditions were flawless, almost eerie in their precision. One meteorologist compared it to a perfect storm in the laboratory of nature. Every variable that could maximize strength, hot water, moist air, low shear, and slow movement, aligned at the same moment. What followed was not just intensification. It was ignition. There's a term meteorologists use for moments like this: rapid intensification. It describes when a tropical cyclone's wind speeds increase by at least 35 miles per hour within 24 hours. Melissa didn't just cross that line. She obliterated it. In less than 18 hours, she leapt from a mild tropical storm to a full-fledged Category 4 hurricane. By dawn the next day, she was pushing the very ceiling of the hurricane scale, Category 5, the maximum classification known to man. To put that into perspective, that's like a small propeller plane turning into a jet fighter overnight. The narrator likens it to lighting a match in a room filled with jet fuel. One spark, one perfect mix of heat and moisture, and suddenly the entire system ignites. So why did this happen so fast? Because the ocean was ready to explode. The Caribbean's upper ocean heat content, essentially the depth and intensity of warm water, was among the highest ever recorded. Combined with a calm atmosphere and slow forward speed, Melissa was allowed to sit, spin, and strengthen like a pot left boiling on a hot stove. Instead of cooling the waters beneath, she churned up more heat. Every gust she produced helped fuel the next. It was a runaway cycle, a feedback loop of energy and destruction. Normally, Hurricanes that move slowly lose steam because they stir up cooler water from below. But in this case, the ocean's heat was so deep that Melissa could afford to crawl at just 7 miles per hour without penalty. The longer she lingered, the more energy she absorbed. It's as if the ocean kept refilling her tank faster than she could burn through it. Satellite imagery during those hours looked like something out of a simulation. The storm's eye, perfectly circular, cloud-free, glowing with infrared heat, grew sharper and smaller, a clear sign of intensification. Around it, thunderclouds spiraled in symmetrical bands, shooting 50,000 feet into the sky. At the storm's core, updrafts were rising at nearly 150 miles per hour, lifting vapor and releasing latent heat in a self-feeding frenzy. By the time the sun rose over Jamaica, that glowing pinwheel was less than 40 miles offshore, and still strengthening. The countdown to landfall. The story of Hurricane Melissa's rise reads like a suspense thriller. On October 16th, a tropical wave drifted off Africa's coast, one of dozens that form each year. By October 21st, it reached the central Caribbean and organized into a weak tropical storm. Meteorologists gave it a name but not much attention. Then, something changed. By October 25th, data from weather buoys showed ocean heat content higher than normal, and atmospheric models hinted at potential rapid intensification. Within 12 hours, Melissa jumped from a 70 miles per hour storm to 130 miles per hour, a Category 4. Forecasters scrambled. Satellite analysts watched the cloud tops cool, a signal that convection was surging upward. By late October 27th, she had crossed the Category 5 threshold with sustained winds over 180 miles per hour. At 9:30 a.m. on October 28th, Melissa made landfall near New Hope, Jamaica, a name now forever marked in meteorological history. The island, roughly the size of Connecticut, had never experienced a direct hit from such a strong storm. Wind sensors failed one after another as gusts exceeded their measurement limits. The central pressure bottomed out around 892 millibars, making Melissa one of the 10 most intense hurricanes ever recorded in the Atlantic basin. As she moved across Jamaica's mountainous terrain, her strength dropped slightly, but the damage was already beyond imagination. Hillsides collapsed under torrents of rain. Rivers jumped their banks. Roads vanished under mud and debris. Power lines snapped like twigs. And as the storm's eye crossed inland, the eerie calm inside that circular void gave people a few haunting minutes of silence before the second wall hit, even stronger than the first. Even with the best technology, forecasters were caught off guard by the sheer speed of Melissa's intensification. Modern weather models rely heavily on equations that assume a storm will eventually weaken as it stirs the sea beneath. But those equations didn't account for how unusually deep the Caribbean's warm layer was. As a result, projections were consistently too conservative, sometimes underestimating Melissa's winds by as much as 30 or 40 miles per hour. One model predicted a Category 3 at landfall. Reality delivered a Category 5. That miscalculation wasn't due to incompetence. It revealed a major scientific blind spot. Many global forecasting systems use sea surface temperature data from satellites, but satellites only measure the top millimeter of the ocean. The deeper heat reserves, often hundreds of feet below, go largely unmeasured in real time. Melissa proved that those unseen layers can make all the difference between a manageable hurricane and an apocalyptic one. Meteorologists also faced challenges predicting how Jamaica's rugged topography would affect the storm. Would the Blue Mountains disrupt the circulation? Would the friction slow it down? The answers turned out to be mixed. While the storm did weaken slightly, the slow pace meant it spent longer dumping rain, turning valleys into rivers and slopes into landslides. The takeaway was clear: even in the era of AI-assisted forecasting, tropical meteorology remains part science, part intuition. We can calculate wind speeds, but predicting how nature will stack her cards is still one of humanity's most humbling tasks. As Melissa made her destructive march across the island, Jamaica faced one of the greatest natural tests in its modern history. Entire parishes were plunged into darkness. Communication lines failed. Airports shut down. The southern coast, from Clarendon to St. Elizabeth, bore the brunt of the storm surge, with walls of water as high as 13 feet swallowing fishing villages and coastal farms. In Kingston, winds tore billboards from buildings and scattered rooftops into the streets. In the rural interior, banana plantations, a lifeline for thousands, were flattened. Relief workers described scenes of devastation that echoed the aftermath of hurricanes like Dorian or Maria. Homes stripped to their foundations, families searching for shelter, and silence where entire neighborhoods once stood bustling. What made it harder was how long the storm stayed. Moving at walking speed, Melissa took nearly a full day to cross the island, leaving a trail of damage from southwest to northeast. And when she finally exited into the Caribbean north of Port Maria, she was still a Category 3 storm, strong enough to threaten eastern Cuba and the Bahamas next. But even as the winds faded, another kind of storm was just beginning: the humanitarian crisis. Food supplies ran low. Roads to hospitals were blocked. Power restoration was projected to take weeks, and in some places, months. For a country whose economy depends heavily on tourism, agriculture, and infrastructure, the losses stretched far beyond physical destruction. They cut deep into the nation's economic heart. As the narrator transitions from disaster to reflection, the tone becomes quieter, more contemplative. The question now isn't just what happened, but why it happened so fast, and what it means for the future. Melissa was not an isolated fluke. It was part of a growing pattern: storms feeding on ever-warmer oceans, intensifying faster, striking harder, and catching communities off guard. Scientists have been warning for years that a warmer climate doesn't necessarily mean more hurricanes, but it does mean stronger ones. In 2025 alone, sea surface temperatures across the Caribbean, the Gulf of Mexico, and the Western Atlantic broke multiple records. That extra heat acts as stored energy, fuel waiting to be tapped. When storms like Melissa appear, they convert that invisible energy into raw destruction. And the terrifying part? That energy is only increasing. When the winds finally eased and the sky turned pale gray, Jamaica emerged into a silence that felt heavier than the storm itself. The air was thick with humidity and disbelief. Streets were flooded, power lines dangled like torn ribbons, and families wandered through debris that had once been their homes. The island had survived the night, but it was clear that Hurricane Melissa had rewritten everything about how Jamaica understood hurricanes. From the air, drone footage revealed a landscape transformed. Rivers had carved new paths through farmlands, entire coastal communities were erased, and thousands of homes were left roofless. In Kingston, the skyline looked fractured, glass towers bore scars from flying debris, and harbors once filled with tourist boats were littered with wreckage. In Clarendon and Manchester, roads turned to rivers, cutting off villages from emergency crews. And in the west, near Negril, resorts that had stood untouched for decades were now shells of their former beauty. This wasn't just a weather disaster, it was a national trauma. For many Jamaicans, Melissa wasn't only a storm but a revelation. It exposed how fragile even the strongest infrastructures could be when nature decides to push beyond limits. Jamaica had endured many hurricanes before, but never had one arrived with winds that roared past 180 miles per hour. Never had one carved through the island so slowly, like a saw dragging through wood. As emergency services fanned out, it became clear that Melissa's power was amplified by human vulnerability. Coastal defenses were outdated. Many homes were built before modern building codes existed. Drainage systems, already strained by urban growth, collapsed under 30 inches of rain in less than 2 days. In that sense, Melissa was more than a meteorological event. It was a mirror showing what decades of unpreparedness could lead to in an era of supercharged storms. Scientists stepped forward to analyze what made this storm so exceptional. They described it as a compound event, a collision of rare atmospheric factors that turned a normal hurricane season into a nightmare. The deep ocean heat was the first culprit, but there was more. A powerful high-pressure ridge to the north trapped Melissa over Jamaica, preventing her from escaping westward into open water. That blockage kept her swirling over the same region, maximizing rainfall and wind exposure. Another key factor was atmospheric moisture. The Caribbean air mass during late October was unusually saturated. Water vapor, which acts as fuel for hurricanes, was near record levels. Every kilogram of vapor that condensed into cloud released massive amounts of latent heat, accelerating the storm's internal convection. In simpler terms, the sky itself was feeding Melissa faster than models could measure. Then there was the influence of the Madden-Julian Oscillation, or MJO, a global pattern that enhances storm formation in certain regions every few weeks. During late October 2025, the MJO was strongly active over the Caribbean, making conditions even more favorable for storm development. It was as if every switch in nature had been flipped to on. Meteorologists reviewing the data called Melissa a case study for the future of hurricane behavior in a warming world. Traditional forecasts rely on surface-level sea temperatures to estimate storm strength, but Melissa forced a rethink. She drew her power from subsurface warmth extending hundreds of feet down, a phenomenon invisible to satellites but devastatingly real in its impact. That realization has sparked a new push for oceanic monitoring systems capable of measuring heat content beneath the waves, not just at the surface. In the aftermath, Jamaica's Prime Minister addressed the nation, calling Melissa a wake-up call for the Caribbean. He spoke of rebuilding not just homes, but systems, better infrastructure, stricter building standards, and smarter urban planning. International aid began to pour in, but so did hard questions. Could this level of devastation happen again? And if so, how could small island nations ever truly prepare? To answer that, the documentary turns its lens outward, beyond Jamaica's shores. It looks at a warming planet where the ingredients for rapid intensification are becoming common. Over the last decade, storms like Dorian, Maria, Patricia, and now Melissa have all exhibited similar traits: explosive strengthening in a short period of time, driven by warmer oceans and stable upper-level conditions. The difference now is how often it's happening. In the 1980s, a Category 5 hurricane in the Atlantic was a once-in-a-decade event. Today, we see one almost every year. Scientists warn that we may need to expand the hurricane scale altogether. Category 5, which starts at 157 miles per hour, doesn't adequately describe storms like Melissa that push toward 185 or even 190 miles per hour. There are calls within the meteorological community to introduce a Category 6 designation, acknowledging that the atmosphere itself is evolving faster than our definitions. As the documentary progresses, the narrator steps back from the science to focus on people, the survivors who endured the storm's fury. A woman in St. Elizabeth describes how her family huddled in a bathroom as winds ripped the roof off their house. A fisherman in Old Harbor recalls seeing the sea retreat before surging back in a wall of water. Their stories are raw, emotional, and deeply human. Each voice echoes the same realization: Melissa wasn't just wind and rain, it was a force that tested the soul of a nation. Emergency shelters across the island became lifelines. Communities that had never spoken before now shared food, candles, and courage. Jamaican resilience, forged through centuries of challenge, shone through the wreckage. The spirit of unity that followed the storm became a lesson as powerful as any scientific insight. But the documentary doesn't let viewers settle into sentimentality for long. It confronts a global truth: the conditions that created Melissa aren't disappearing. They're intensifying. Ocean heat content across the Caribbean is rising at unprecedented rates. Climate scientists have confirmed that 2025 was among the hottest years in recorded history for tropical waters. That means more energy for storms, higher rainfall totals, and stronger surges. The narrator explains that hurricanes are not simply getting worse. They are changing form, becoming wetter, slower, and more destructive in ways that old models can't fully capture. Slow-moving storms like Melissa are particularly dangerous because they act like stationary engines, dumping rain over one location for hours or even days. This shift towards slower, wetter hurricanes is one of the most troubling patterns meteorologists have observed in recent years. To adapt, scientists say we must build not just stronger walls, but smarter systems. Real-time data sharing between nations, investments in ocean buoys and underwater sensors, and more advanced simulation models that couple oceanic and atmospheric behavior could all make a difference. The Caribbean, with its chain of small yet vulnerable islands, is a perfect testing ground for this next generation of forecasting. The film also touches on geopolitics, how climate resilience in the Caribbean depends on global cooperation. Rising sea levels, warmer oceans, and erratic weather patterns all share one source: a planet heating beyond safe limits. The narrator's tone turns firm. Hurricane Melissa wasn't just Jamaica's disaster, it was a warning for all humanity. Scenes of flooded towns dissolve into satellite imagery of global sea surface anomalies, glowing red across the tropics. The message is clear. The forces that fueled Melissa are already building elsewhere. In the Pacific, typhoons are growing stronger. In the Indian Ocean, cyclones are appearing in new places. The world is entering an age of atmospheric extremes, and the Caribbean is only the front line. Yet, amid the destruction, there's hope. In the months following Melissa, international teams arrived to rebuild schools with hurricane-resistant materials, install microgrids powered by solar energy, and restore mangrove forests that act as natural storm barriers. Jamaican engineers began developing new coastal housing designs with reinforced foundations and aerodynamic roofs. The tragedy became a turning point, a chance to rethink resilience from the ground up. The documentary reminds viewers that rebuilding is not just about bricks and steel, it's about memory. Each generation must remember storms like Melissa not as moments of fear, but as chapters of learning. Preparedness is cultural as much as technical. Communities that practice evacuation drills, protect natural barriers, and listen to early warnings stand a better chance of survival than those that don't. The film then circles back to the science one last time, breaking down the relationship between atmospheric pressure and wind speed. It explains how, as pressure drops, the air rushes inward, accelerating the rotation around the eye. Melissa's 892 millibars marked one of the lowest pressures ever recorded in the Atlantic Basin, rivaling the most violent hurricanes in modern history. Each millibar represents a deeper vacuum, a stronger pull, faster winds, and more explosive power. That connection between pressure and destruction, the narrator says, is why meteorologists fear storms that rapidly lose pressure overnight. It's the invisible warning that something extraordinary is happening inside the atmosphere. And with modern satellite and radar data, scientists can now detect these collapses earlier, but the challenge remains translating that science into public urgency. Too often, people hear Category 4 or Category 5 and assume it's just another number. Melissa showed what those numbers truly mean. Whole towns flattened, lives upended, history rewritten. As the documentary moves toward its end, it shifts tone once more, from tragedy to reflection. The camera pans across Jamaica's recovering landscapes, green hills returning after floods, new homes rising beside broken ones, children walking to reopen schools. Life, the narrator says, always finds a way to rebuild. But rebuilding must come with wisdom. Melissa will be studied for decades, not only for her meteorological record but for what she revealed about our world's fragility. The storm's formation, intensification, and impact will appear in future textbooks as an example of how modern climate dynamics can transform a simple tropical wave into a record-shattering catastrophe. But beyond the charts and graphs, her story will live in the memories of those who survived. The sound of the wind, the fear in the dark, the silence after the eye passed overhead. In the final moments, the narrator delivers a quiet, steady message. Hurricane Melissa was born from heat, shaped by wind, and sustained by a planet out of balance. Her record winds and low pressure weren't just numbers, they were symptoms of something deeper, an atmosphere now supercharged by our own actions. We can't stop hurricanes from forming, but we can choose how we prepare for them. We can build smarter, warn earlier, and act faster. Every island, every coastline, every city must take that lesson seriously. As the screen fades to black, the final words appear over the image of a calm Caribbean sunset. And with that, the story of Hurricane Melissa ends, not as a tale of destruction, but as a call to awareness. Because if one storm could rewrite the rules of nature in a single week, then understanding that storm may be the key to surviving the next.